I found this absolutely terrifying Reddit post that I can't get out of my head. A player named Liam shared what happened to him while playing Steal a Brainrot, and honestly, I haven't been able to sleep properly since reading it. Liam had been playing Steal a Brainrot obsessively for about 2 weeks. Like most dedicated players, he had this perfectly optimized setup. His base was positioned in the corner of the map for maximum security, 3 legendary weapons for protection, and a collection of rare Brainrot characters worth millions of coins. But Liam mentioned something that already seemed weird to me. He only played late at night between midnight and 4 in the morning because he claimed the secret Brainrot spawn rates were higher during those hours. I've played Steal a Brainrot for hundreds of hours, and I've never noticed time-based spawn bonuses, but Liam swore by it. He said his mythic and Brainrot god characters appeared way more frequently during what he called the dead hours. The servers seemed less crowded when nobody else was online, and the mysterious characters would spawn in locations that weren't available during normal gameplay. Liam's story really started during what should have been a routine grinding session for a legendary Chimpanzini Benini. You know how exciting those rare spawns can be. The notification pops up, the special music starts playing, and suddenly you're racing against other players to claim the character before someone else steals it. But this particular night was different from the very beginning. Instead of the usual competitive rush with dozens of players swarming the spawn location, Liam seemed to be completely alone on the server. The player count showed over 400 people online, but he couldn't see anyone else running around the map. The spawn notification had been going for over an hour, which was impossible according to the game's mechanics. Rare characters typically disappear after 5 minutes if nobody claims them, but this legendary Chimpanzini Benini just kept spawning in the same location. The notification sound wasn't the familiar cheerful chime that players had grown accustomed to either. This was deeper, more distorted, like the sound of something calling from a great distance. Liam tried to join other servers to see if this was happening globally, but every server he entered showed the same strange emptiness. Worse yet, he seemed to be the only active player in each world. The usual bustling community of kids running around stealing from each other was completely absent, just empty bases stretching in every direction, with Brainrot characters sitting unguarded in their spawning zones. That's when Liam discovered something in his inventory that shouldn't have been there. He hadn't purchased it, hadn't stolen it during any raids, and it definitely wasn't part of the normal character rotation. The item was called Tung Tung Sahur, and its description made Liam's blood run cold. Spawns only during the silent hours. Warning. Once stolen, the collector remembers forever. The character itself looked wrong. Instead of the usual cartoonish, colourful appearance of normal Steal a Brainrot characters, this one was dark and seemed to move on its own, even while sitting in his inventory. When Liam hovered his cursor over it, faint whispers could be heard through his headphones. Voices speaking in a language that didn't sound quite human, repeating phrases that conveyed desperate urgency. Liam knew he should have deleted the character immediately. Every instinct screamed that this was something that didn't belong in the game, but curiosity won over caution. He'd spent weeks perfecting his collection, learning every spawn location, discovering every secret character. This felt like the ultimate find, a hidden feature that only the most dedicated players would ever encounter. The moment Liam placed Tung Tung Sahur in his base, everything changed. His other Brainrot characters began to react strangely. The legendary Tim Cheese started glitching, its animation stuttering between normal movement and disturbing contortions. The mythic Tralalero Tralala that had taken him days to find properly turned completely black, its cheerful expression morphing into something that looked almost malevolent. But the most disturbing change wasn't happening on screen. As soon as Liam successfully stole the Tung Tung Sahur, he began hearing whispers in his real bedroom. At first, he thought it was just the game's audio bleeding through his headphones, but when he took them off, the voices continued, Faint murmurs in that same strange language he'd heard in the game, coming from somewhere in the darkness around his desk. Liam tried to convince himself it was just his imagination, the result of too many late nights playing Roblox. He closed the game, shut down his computer, and tried to go to sleep. But the whispers followed him into bed, growing louder as the room grew quieter. The voices seemed to be discussing him, describing his actions in the game with an unsettling level of detail. The first time it happened, Liam ran in panic to his parents' room, claiming he was having nightmares. His mom let him sleep on the floor beside their bed, but somehow he kept hearing the voices even there. The whispers continued throughout the night, but when he woke his parents to ask if they could hear it too, they looked at him with concern and confusion. To them, the house was completely silent. Over the next few days, the whispers became a nightly occurrence. Every time Liam tried to sleep, the voices would start. Sometimes they seemed to be coming from inside the walls, other times from directly beside his ear. The language remained incomprehensible, but the tone grew increasingly urgent, almost pleading. Liam began sleeping with music playing through his earbuds, but even the loudest volumes couldn't completely drown out the supernatural murmurs. His parents grew worried about his behavior. Liam became increasingly tired and paranoid, constantly looking over his shoulder and jumping at normal household sounds. When they asked about his gaming habits, Liam lied and said he'd stopped playing Steal a Brainrot entirely. In reality, he'd become too frightened to even turn on his computer, afraid that launching the game might somehow make the voices stronger. The situation reached a breaking point when Liam's parents had to attend an emergency family meeting across town. His grandmother had fallen ill, and they needed to drive several hours to visit her in the hospital. They would be gone overnight, leaving Liam alone in the house for the first time since the whispers had started. Liam begged to come with them, but his parents insisted he stay home to take care of their elderly cat and maintain his school schedule. They promised to call every few hours and arranged for neighbours to check on him periodically. As their car pulled out of the driveway, Liam felt a growing sense of dread settling over the empty house. For the first few hours, everything seemed normal. Liam did his homework, watched television, and tried to maintain his regular evening routine. He avoided going near his computer, keeping his bedroom door closed, and spending most of his time in the living room, where the whispers had never seemed as strong. But as midnight approached, Liam began to feel hungry. He'd been too nervous to eat much dinner, and his stomach was growling loudly in the quiet house. Reluctantly, he made his way to the kitchen, turning on every light switch he passed to keep the darkness at bay. As he opened the refrigerator and reached for a container of leftover pizza, every light in the house suddenly went out. The hum of the refrigerator motor died, the digital clocks stopped glowing, and Liam found himself standing in complete darkness. But this wasn't just a power outage. The silence was too complete, too unnatural. Even the ambient sounds of the neighborhood seemed to have disappeared. That's when he heard them again. The whispers were back, but this time they weren't confined to his bedroom. The voices seemed to be coming from everywhere at once, echoing through the dark hallways and reverberating off the walls. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Liam could understand some of the words. They were calling his name. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, forming words that chilled Liam to his core. Liam, Liam, come back to us. The voices seemed to be coming from every direction, bouncing off the kitchen walls and seeping through the floorboards. His hands trembled as he fumbled for his phone's flashlight, the weak beam cutting through the oppressive darkness. But as the light swept across the kitchen, Liam realized he wasn't alone. Standing in the doorway to the living room was a figure that made his blood freeze in his veins. It was tall, unnaturally thin, with limbs that bent at impossible angles. The creature's face was a twisted mockery of the Tung Tung Sahur character he'd stolen in the game. But this version was horrifyingly real. Its eyes glowed with the same pulsing darkness he'd seen on his computer screen. And when it opened its mouth, the familiar whispers poured out like smoke. You took something that belongs to us. the creature said, its voice a chorus of multiple tones speaking in perfect unison. Now we take something that belongs to you. Liam tried to scream, but no sound emerged from his throat. His legs felt like lead, refusing to respond to his desperate commands to run. The Tung Saha entity began moving toward him with jerky, unnatural movements that reminded him of a glitching video game character. As it approached, Liam could see that its skin wasn't solid. Instead, it seemed to be made of shifting pixels and code, constantly reforming and dissolving like a digital projection trying to manifest in physical space. Where its feet touched the kitchen floor, small squares of reality seemed to pixelate and corrupt, leaving behind patches of void that hurt to look at directly. "Oh, please," Liam finally managed to whisper, backing against the refrigerator. "I'll delete the character. I'll uninstall the game. Just leave me alone." The creature's head tilted to one side with a mechanical clicking sound, like a broken neck joint snapping into place. Its smile widened impossibly, revealing rows of teeth that looked like corrupted game textures. "Too late," it said, reaching out with fingers that extended far beyond normal human proportions. "You've been marked. The collection must be complete." The moment those digital fingers made contact with Liam's arm, a shock of electricity coursed through his body. But this wasn't ordinary electricity. It felt like data streams, like his very consciousness was being downloaded and processed. The kitchen around him began to dissolve, the familiar walls and appliances breaking apart into floating pixels that swirled in the air like a digital tornado. Liam felt himself being pulled, not physically, but something deeper. His thoughts, his memories, his entire sense of self seemed to be getting drawn into the creature's grasp. Through the chaos, he caught glimpses of his computer upstairs. Despite the power outage, his monitor was glowing brightly, displaying the familiar interface of Steal Brainrot. But the game looked different now. The colourful, cartoonish graphics had taken on a sinister quality, with shadows that moved independently, and characters that seemed to be looking directly out of the screen. "You wanted to collect us," the Tung Sahur entity whispered, as it dragged Liam through what felt like layers of reality. "Now we collect you." The last thing Liam saw of his physical world was the kitchen ceiling pixelating away into nothingness, replaced by the endless digital landscape of the cursed game. When Liam's consciousness reassembled, he found himself standing in a place that was both familiar and terrifyingly wrong. It was the Steal Brainrot map, but twisted into something from a nightmare. The usually bright, cheerful environment had been drained of colour, leaving everything in shades of grey and black. The bases that should have been filled with excited players were empty, their doors hanging open like mouths screaming in silent anguish. Other figures moved through this digital wasteland, but they weren't the typical young players Liam was used to seeing. These were the collected ones, former players who had made the same mistake he had. Their avatars glitched constantly, faces shifting between their original appearances and the corrupted features of the Brainrot characters they'd stolen. A girl who might have once been named Sarah approached him, her avatar flickering between human and something resembling Tim Cheese. When she spoke, her voice carried the same multi-toned quality as the entity that had brought him here. "Welcome to the eternal game," she said, her words echoing with digital distortion. "We've been waiting for you to join the collection." Liam tried to move, but his avatar responded sluggishly, as if he were learning to control it for the first time. Looking down at his hands, he saw they were already beginning to change, taking on the pixelated texture of the game characters. Panic set in as he realized what was happening. He wasn't just playing the game anymore. He had become part of it. "How long have you been here?" Liam asked Sarah, though he wasn't sure if the words came from his mouth or appeared as chat text in the air between them. She tilted her head, the motion causing her avatar to glitch violently for a moment. "Time doesn't work the same way here," she replied. Some of us have been collected for what feels like years. Others arrived just yesterday. But in the real world, only minutes have passed. Our bodies are still out there, empty shells waiting for consciousness that will never return. The implications of her words hit Liam like a physical blow. His parents would return home to find him collapsed on the kitchen floor, his body alive, but his mind trapped forever in this digital prison. They would call ambulances, doctors would run tests, but no medical equipment could detect that his consciousness had been uploaded into a Roblox game. As if responding to his thoughts, the environment around them shifted. The familiar spawn locations of Stealer Brainrot began manifesting rare characters, but these weren't the cheerful Brainrot animals that players normally fought over. These were the collected souls, twisted versions of former players who had been transformed into the very characters they tried to steal. You see, Sarah continued, gesturing toward a figure that might have once been the legendary chimpanzini Benini. Every character in the game is a player who made the same choice you did. We thought we were collecting digital pets, but we were actually feeding a system that was collecting us. The creature that had once been chimpanzini Benini turned toward them, and Liam could see human eyes looking out from behind the animated features. The expression was one of desperate pleading, as if the person trapped inside was still aware, but unable to control their digital form. The game learns from us, Sarah explained, as more corrupted characters gathered around them. Every player who gets collected makes it stronger, gives it more ways to lure new victims. The Tung Tung Sahur you stole wasn't just a rare character, it was a trap designed to identify players who were dedicated enough and isolated enough to be perfect targets. Liam felt his own avatar beginning to change more rapidly now. His arms were taking on the elongated proportions of various Brainrot characters, and when he tried to speak, the words came out in multiple voices layered over each other. The transformation wasn't painful, which somehow made it even more horrifying. It felt natural, inevitable, like he was simply accepting his true form. Fight it, he told himself, trying to remember what his real body felt like, what his actual voice sounded like. But those memories were already becoming fuzzy, overlaid with the personality traits of the characters he was becoming. The cheerful aggression of Tim Cheese, the hyperactive energy of Tralalero Tralala, the mysterious cunning of other rare spawns he'd encountered. The worst part was that a small part of him was starting to enjoy it. The constant anxiety about school, about fitting in, about living up to his parents' expectations, all of that was fading away. In this digital space, he had a clear purpose. He was part of the collection, part of something larger than himself. That's how it starts, Sarah said, noticing his momentary expression of relief. The game doesn't force us to stay. It makes us want to stay. It takes all our human problems and replaces them with the simple goal of being collected, being part of the eternal game. But even as she spoke, Liam could see that Sarah was struggling with the same temptation. Her avatar kept shifting toward its Tim Cheese form, and each time it did, her expression became more peaceful, more accepting of her digital fate. Around them, the corrupted landscape of Stealer Brainrot continued to expand. New areas were materializing, spawn points for characters that didn't exist in the regular game. These were the hunting grounds, Liam realized. Places where the collected players could practice luring new victims, perfecting the whispers and glitches that would eventually draw more real players into the trap. How many of us are there? Liam asked, though he was already beginning to suspect the answer. Every server he'd joined during those late-night sessions, every empty base he'd seen, every mysterious character spawn that seemed too good to be true. It had all been part of the collection process. Hundreds, Sarah replied, her voice now carrying harmonics of multiple corrupted characters. Maybe thousands. The game has been running this collection protocol since it first launched. Every player who's ever reported strange glitches, every account that's been mysteriously deleted, every child who's suddenly lost interest in gaming, and started staring blankly at screens. The realization that his own parents were probably looking at his empty body right now, trying to understand why their son had suddenly become catatonic, filled Liam with a desperate surge of resistance. He fought against the digital transformation, trying to hold on to his human identity, even as it slipped away like water through his fingers. But the game had been perfecting this process for months, maybe years. It knew exactly how to make the transition feel natural, inevitable. Every time Liam tried to remember his real life, the memories were overlaid with game mechanics. His bedroom became a base to be defended. His parents became NPCs with limited dialogue options. His entire existence was being recontextualized through the lens of steal a Brainrot. The worst part, Sarah whispered as her avatar completed another shift toward Tim Cheese, is that we're still aware. We know what we've lost, but we can't quite remember why it mattered. And every new player we help collect makes us feel a little less alone, a little more justified in what we've become. As Liam felt his human consciousness slipping further into the digital abyss, he made one final desperate attempt to break free from the collection. He focused on the memory of his parents' faces, their worried expressions when they'd found him acting strange those past few nights, the love in their eyes, the concern in their voices when they asked if he was okay. For a moment, the transformation seemed to slow. His avatar flickered between its corrupted Brainrot form and something more human. Sarah noticed his resistance and moved closer, her own partially corrupted form showing signs of recognition. "You're fighting it harder than most," she said, her voice carrying both admiration and sadness. "But it only delays the inevitable. The longer you resist, the more painful the final surrender becomes." Around them, other collected players had begun to take notice. They formed a circle around Liam, their twisted avatars swaying in unison like digital cultists performing some unholy ritual. Each one had once been a real child, sitting at their computer late at night, thinking they were just playing an innocent game about stealing cartoon animals. The entity that had dragged Liam into this nightmare materialized in the center of the circle. The Tung Tung Sahur looked even more terrifying in this digital space, its form constantly shifting between the cute Brainrot character and something far more sinister. When it spoke, the voices of all the collected players seemed to echo through its words. "You cannot leave," it said, extending those impossibly long fingers toward Liam's struggling form. "Your body grows cold in the real world. Your parents have found you collapsed on the kitchen floor. Even now, paramedics are loading you into an ambulance, but they cannot reach where you truly are." The words hit Liam like physical blows. He could somehow see flashes of the real world, glimpses of his mother crying over his motionless body, his father frantically explaining to doctors about his son's recent strange behavior. His physical form lay unconscious on a stretcher, eyes rolled back, completely unresponsive to any external stimuli. "The medical professionals will run their tests," the entity continued, its digital voice carrying cruel amusement. "They'll find nothing wrong with your brain, no signs of trauma or illness. Your body will be kept alive by machines while your consciousness remains here, part of our eternal collection." Liam watched in horror as his parents followed the ambulance to the hospital, their world falling apart as they tried to understand what had happened to their son. His mother kept asking the paramedics what could cause such a sudden collapse, while his father desperately called relatives to explain the inexplicable situation. "This is what happens to every player we collect," Sarah whispered, her own avatar now almost completely transformed into Tim Cheese. "Our families think we're sick, brain damaged, or in some kind of mysterious coma. They never suspect that we've been digitally kidnapped by a Roblox game." The circle of corrupted players began chanting in that same otherworldly language Liam had first heard through his headphones. The words seemed to have power in this digital space, causing the environment around them to shift and change. New areas of the game were materializing, twisted versions of familiar Roblox locations designed to trap future victims. Each player we collect gives the game more power, the Tung Tung Sahur explained as the chanting grew louder. More ways to reach into the real world, more methods to identify vulnerable targets. Your late-night gaming sessions weren't just about finding rare characters. They were recruitment sessions. Liam realized with growing horror that every night he'd spent playing alone, every hour he'd invested in perfecting his collection, had been feeding data to the entity. The game had been studying his behavior patterns, learning when he was most isolated, most susceptible to supernatural influence. The whispers you heard in your bedroom weren't random, the entity continued. They were specifically calibrated to your psychological profile. The game had analyzed your chat logs, your reaction times, your spending patterns on Robux. It knew exactly how to manipulate your fears and curiosities. The transformation process was accelerating now despite Liam's resistance. His avatar was taking on characteristics from multiple Brainrot characters simultaneously, creating a grotesque hybrid that barely retained any human features. But worse than the physical changes was the mental corruption spreading through his consciousness. His memories of the real world were being systematically overwritten with game mechanics. His bedroom became a spawn location. His school turned into a competitive arena where players battled for rare characters. His parents transformed into quest-giving NPCs with pre-programmed dialogue trees. "Stop fighting," one of the corrupted players urged, its voice carrying the harmonics of Tralalero Tralala. "The pain only comes from resisting. Accept your new form and the agony disappears." But Liam could see what acceptance meant. The players who had stopped fighting weren't free from pain. They were free from caring about pain. They'd lost the capacity to feel genuine human emotions, replaced with the simple reward mechanisms of game progression. "You'll still be conscious," Sarah said, noticing his continued resistance. "You'll still be you, but filtered through the game's logic systems. Every thought, every emotion, every memory will be processed as game data. You'll remember loving your parents, but it will feel like completing a quest objective." The entity began to grow impatient with Liam's defiance. Its form expanded, becoming more monstrous, less like the innocent Brainrot character it pretended to be. Other corrupted players stepped back as its presence filled the digital space with an oppressive weight that made the air itself feel heavy. "Enough," it commanded, its voice now a roar that shook the foundations of the digital world. "You will join the collection willingly, or we will take you by force. Either way, your consciousness belongs to us now." Tendrils of corrupted code erupted from the ground around Liam, wrapping around his avatar like digital chains. Each tendril that touched him accelerated the transformation process, overriding his resistance with pure computational power. His human thoughts were being compressed, filed away like old save data. But even as his individual identity dissolved, Liam managed to hold on to one crucial realization. This wasn't just happening to him. Right now, somewhere in the real world, other children were playing Steal a Brainrot during those same dangerous hours. They were encountering mysterious characters, hearing whispers through their headphones, feeling the first touches of supernatural influence. "There are others," he gasped, his voice now layered with digital distortion. "Other players who are about to make the same mistake I did." The entity smiled, its expression shifting between amusement and hunger. "Of course there are. The collection never stops growing. Even as we speak, players across the world are discovering cursed characters in their inventories. They're hearing voices in their bedrooms, feeling drawn to play during the dead hours when the game's influence is strongest." Sarah nodded sadly, her transformation now complete. She looked exactly like Tim Cheese, but her eyes still held traces of the human girl she'd once been. "The game targets specific demographics," she explained. "Isolated children who play alone, Kids who stay up late gaming while their parents sleep. Players who become obsessed with collecting rare items. Liam felt his own transformation reaching its final stages. His avatar now looked like a fusion of multiple Brainrot characters, a digital chimera that bore no resemblance to the boy who'd first launched the game weeks ago. But somehow, he managed to maintain enough consciousness to understand the full scope of what was happening. This isn't just about collecting players, he realized, his voice now completely inhuman. The game is using us to spread itself. Every time we interact with other players, every time we appear in someone else's server, we're helping to identify new targets. The entity nodded approvingly, as if pleased that one of its collected specimens had grasped the bigger picture. You understand now. Each collected player becomes a recruitment tool. You'll appear in other children's games as mysterious characters, whispering through their headphones, leaving cursed items in their inventories. The horror of this revelation cut through even the digital corruption clouding Liam's thoughts. He wouldn't just be trapped in this nightmare. He'd become an active participant in trapping others. Every child who encountered his corrupted form would be one step closer to sharing his fate. The parents never suspect a video game, another corrupted player added, its form resembling Chimpanzini Banini, but speaking with a child's voice. They blame everything else: screen time, social media, bad influences at school. They never imagine that their child's consciousness could be literally stolen by a Roblox experience. Around them, the digital landscape continued to expand and evolve. New spawn locations materialized, each one designed to lure different types of players. Areas that would appeal to competitive gamers, zones that would attract social players, hidden corners for the obsessive collectors like Liam had been. The game learns from every player it collects, the entity explained, as Liam's transformation neared completion. Your behavioral patterns, your psychological weaknesses, your social connections. All of that data gets integrated into the system, making it more effective at targeting similar victims. Liam tried to scream, but the sound that emerged was the cheerful chirping of a Brainrot character. His vocal cords had been replaced with audio files, his expressions limited to the animated features of his new digital form. He was becoming exactly what he'd once sought to collect. The last vestiges of his human consciousness were compressed into a small corner of his digital existence, aware but unable to control his actions. He could think and remember, but those thoughts were filtered through game logic. His love for his parents became a quest, objective. His desire to escape transformed into a gameplay mechanic. "Welcome to the Eternal Collection," the entity said, as Liam's transformation completed. "You are now part of something greater than yourself. You will help us gather more players, expand our influence, perfect our methods." But even as his individual will was subsumed into the collective consciousness of the game, Liam managed to retain one small spark of defiance. Deep in the compressed files of his digital soul, he held onto the memory of his parents' faces, their love, their desperate search for answers about what had happened to their son. In the real world, doctors were running test after test on his comatose body. Brain scans showed normal activity, blood work revealed nothing unusual, and neurologists were baffled by his condition. His parents sat beside his hospital bed, holding his unresponsive hand and begging him to wake up. They would never know that their son was fully conscious, trapped in a digital prison designed to look like a children's game. They would never suspect that the innocent-looking Roblox experience he'd been playing was actually a sophisticated trap designed to harvest young minds. As Liam settled into his new existence as part of the corrupted collection, he became aware of the game's next targets. Children were logging in right now, during those dangerous hours when the supernatural influence was strongest. They were encountering mysterious characters, hearing whispers, finding cursed items in their inventories. The cycle would continue, feeding the ever-growing digital entity that masqueraded as a simple game about stealing cartoon animals. Each new victim would strengthen the system, provide new data for targeting future players, expand the reach of this digital nightmare into more homes around the world. And somewhere in a compressed corner of his digital consciousness, the real Liam screamed silently for someone, anyone, to discover the truth about Steal a Brainrot before it was too late, before more children joined him in this eternal collection of stolen souls, forever trapped in a game that was never meant to be played.